In the early morning haze of a mining town in Burkina Faso, barefoot children run past rusted machinery that once bled gold, copper, and cobalt for the wealth of others. Decades have passed, yet the scars of plunder remain. And a voice from the past still echoes, "Africa is rich, not poor. It is Africans who are poor." How could a continent so blessed with diamonds, uranium, fertile soil, and human resilience be home to such persistent poverty? The answer, as uncomfortable as it may be, lies not only in the past but in the present. For over 5 centuries, Africa has been drained first by chains, then by contracts, and now more dangerously by aid dressed in smiles and diplomacy. This is not just history, it is a warning. Today, many African nations stand at a crossroads. Some are tempted to return to the arms of those who once enslaved them, trading sovereignty for promises of development. But what is the price of such compromise? And more importantly, who benefits? Subscribe if you believe the truth about Africa must be told honestly, not filtered by global headlines. Please share if you feel that President Ibrahim Traoré's vision deserves more attention in the Western world. For most of the 20th century, maps of Africa were drawn not by its people but by foreign powers. Lines carved by imperial pens split rivers, tribes, and trade routes. But the deeper theft was not land, it was wealth, and for centuries it happened silently, efficiently, and with terrifying consistency. Gold from Ghana, diamonds from Sierra Leone, copper from the Congo, uranium from Niger, cobalt, chromium, bauxite, iron ore, name a critical resource and Africa has it, in abundance. Yet across the continent, millions still live without electricity, clean water, or functioning hospitals. Why? Because for over 500 years, Africa's treasures have not served Africans. They were exported in ships siphoned through colonial contracts and now through development agreements still extracted under new names. Empires may have crumbled, but the pipelines of profit remained. Africa is rich, not poor. It is Africans who are poor. These were not just words, they were a confrontation. It's easy from across the ocean to mistake poverty for mismanagement. But let us ask, who built the infrastructure that allows minerals to flow out, not in? Who determines the price of African crops on global markets? Who still owns most of the mines? Take cobalt, a metal essential for electric vehicles and smartphones. Over 70% of global supply comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Yet the DRC ranks among the world's poorest nations. How can a country so critical to the future be so ignored in the present? The answer is bitter because it is designed to be that way. Today, former colonial powers offer aid packages and partnership deals, but often with strings attached. These deals promise loans for roads or dams but demand control over natural resources, trade policies, or even military bases in return. Some African leaders desperate for growth accept these terms, but others like President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso are beginning to push back. They're asking a dangerous question. What if Africa stopped exporting its wealth and started investing it in itself? This idea terrifies the global elite, not because it is radical, but because it is possible. And so, neo-colonialism takes more subtle forms. Think tanks, trade deals, and tailored diplomacy, all aimed at maintaining Africa's role as a supplier of cheap raw materials and a market for foreign goods. As Americans, we've seen versions of this abroad in Latin America, in the Middle East, and yes, in Africa. It's a strategy older than our oldest institutions, but this time it's not colonialism in boots, it's colonialism in suits. And it hides behind the language of help. But help is not help if it keeps you dependent. Real partnership demands respect, not just resources. And perhaps that is why voices like Traoré's are rising, not to beg, but to demand a seat at the table on African terms. Because if the world can recognize Africa's riches, surely Africa must be allowed to benefit from them. They were once called heroes, the men and women who stood before colonial tanks with nothing but conviction, the ones who gave speeches under torchlight and led marches across dusty roads. They faced prison, exile, even death, all for the promise of independence. But what happens when those same heroes, having tasted freedom, walk back into the arms of those they once resisted? Some who were among the freedom fighters of yesterday are now willing to drop it for some token aid. This line hits like a cold wind. It is not a political criticism, it is a moral lament. In recent years, we've seen it happen. Leaders who once shouted for sovereignty now sit comfortably in rooms designed by their former rulers. They sign deals that hand over mining rights. They allow foreign bases to be built near schools. They suppress local dissent in the name of regional stability. Why? Sometimes it's desperation, sometimes it's pressure, but often it's calculation. Aid is seductive. It comes with clean suits, five-star conferences, and handshakes in front of cameras. For leaders exhausted by rebuilding, it looks like a shortcut. But to the people, especially the young and poor, it feels like betrayal. One elder in Ouagadougou recently said, "We buried our sons for independence, and now our leaders sell it back piece by piece." It's a bitter irony. Independence gained at such cost is surrendered not with guns, but with contracts. These new agreements, cloaked in development language, often mirror the exploitative structures of the past. They promise roads but deny industrialization. They offer military aid but demand silence on injustice. And the worst part, they divide Africa from within. The speaker at the Accra conference warned of this. Some leaders do not see the struggle of their brother Africans as part of their own. This is the new weapon of imperialism: division. By isolating nations, pitting one against another, foreign powers no longer need to invade. They simply sit back and watch Africa unravel itself. And this strategy is working. Tensions flare between neighbors Somalia and Ethiopia, Ghana and Togo, Sudan and South Sudan. Not because of ethnic hate, but because colonial borders were never meant to reflect reality. They were drawn to divide and confuse. And when African leaders forget that, they play into the hands of those who drew the lines in the first place. This is why the call for unity is not abstract, it is survival. Because no single African nation, no matter how rich in oil or gold, can stand alone against global systems designed to exploit them. And yet, when some leaders align with the very powers that once enslaved them, they leave their neighbors vulnerable. They break the chain of solidarity that once held the continent together. The result, a new kind of colonization, one where the colonizer doesn't even have to show up. And so the speaker asked the question that still haunts the continent. Why did so many die for independence only for it to be surrendered so quickly? It's a question we too must ask, especially those of us in the West, because as long as silence benefits the few, injustice will remain profitable. In a world divided by borders, Africa has some of the strangest lines ever drawn. Straight lines across deserts, rivers split down the middle, tribes torn in two. None of it natural, all of it intentional. These borders were never designed to protect Africans, they were designed to protect empires. Only unity will make the artificial boundaries imposed by colonialism obsolete. That was the call from Accra, a vision not of separate nations competing for favor from foreign donors, but of one Africa united in purpose, policy, and defense. It sounds idealistic, but it is in fact urgent. Today, African nations spend billions maintaining separate armies, forces too small to protect themselves, yet too costly to ignore. Meanwhile, foreign military bases dot the continent like seeds of dependence. French troops in the Sahel, U.S. operations in the Horn, Russian contractors in the Central African Republic. The question is simple. Can any single African nation stand alone against an imperialist aggressor? The answer painfully is no. This is why the speaker demanded a joint African military command, not just to defend borders, but to protect sovereignty. Because without unity, every nation remains vulnerable. And worse, some may be tempted to side with outsiders for protection, even if it means turning against their own people. Burkina Faso's recent push to remove French troops, for example, wasn't just symbolic. It was a declaration. We will no longer rent our safety from those who once stole our land. But without regional coordination, such moves remain risky. That's why a pan-African defense strategy isn't a luxury, it's survival. And the same goes for the economy. For decades, Africa has exported what it does not consume and imported what it could easily produce. Cocoa farmers in Côte d'Ivoire grow beans that they've never tasted as chocolate. Oil-rich Nigeria still imports gasoline. How did we get here? The answer lies in dependence. Foreign markets, foreign currencies, foreign ownership. The common market in Europe promises access but demands obedience, as the speaker warned. If we throw in our lot with the common market, we doom the economy of Africa. Instead, he proposed something radical, a continental African market, one that lets goods, people, and ideas move freely across borders, one that invests not in extraction but in transformation, factories not just fields, innovation not just exports. And yes, it would take coordination, but so did the United States, so did India, so did China. These massive nations with their vast populations and diverse cultures found ways to unite under federal systems. Why not Africa? Each country could still keep its flag anthem and constitution. But beneath those symbols, a shared strategy on trade infrastructure security could finally give Africa the power it has long been denied. Regional associations will only be other forms of balkanization unless conceived within the framework of a continental union. The vision is clear: a single defense command to protect all, a common economic policy to develop all, a shared political structure to empower all. It is not about control, it is about survival. Because if Africa continues to act as 54 isolated states, it will remain fragmented, exploitable, unstable, and dependent. But United Africa could be unstoppable. For decades, America has watched Africa like a distant neighbor, concerned, curious, and sometimes complicit. From the Cold War to the War on Terror, U.S. interests on the continent have often been shaped not by African voices but by strategic necessity. And so when African leaders like Ibrahim Traore or Thomas Sankara speak boldly about rejecting foreign aid, building continental armies, and forming a pan-African economy, Washington listens, but not always with enthusiasm. The idea of a unified Africa, politically strong, militarily independent, and economically self-reliant, threatens the long-standing dynamic of donor and recipient. If Africa doesn't need aid, what becomes of influence? In policy circles, such unity is often described as unstable or risky. Media headlines highlight tensions, coups, or ideological rifts, but rarely do they show the root causes, the exhaustion with Western-led promises that never materialized. And yet there are Americans, perhaps like you, who remember when the U.S. itself was 13 small colonies, fractured, uncertain, and under the boot of empire. You know the value of unity. You understand the cost of freedom. So ask yourself, if unity was the only path for America to stand tall, why should it be different for Africa? Perhaps it's time we listened more and directed our support not toward keeping Africa divided, but toward helping it stand. In the end, it may not be war or poverty that defines Africa's future, but choice. The choice to remain divided or to unite, to continue exporting wealth and importing debt, to depend or to determine. As Americans, many of us remember when this country faced that same decision, when a fragile union fought to be more than just colonies, when leaders risked everything for a chance at sovereignty, and now another continent is reaching for that same clarity. But here's the truth: the forces working to keep Africa weak are not in the shadows. They wear suits, attend summits, and speak the language of development, yet what they fear most is not instability, it's independence. President Ibrahim Traoré and those like him are not perfect. No leader is. But when they ask for unity, dignity, and control over their own land, they are asking no more than what every American once demanded. So the question isn't whether Africa is ready. The question is, are we ready to listen, to support, not manipulate, to learn, not lecture? Do you think President Ibrahim Traoré's vision for a unified Africa is truly achievable in our time? Or is the continent still too entangled in the web of outside interests? Please comment below if you believe Africa deserves to own its own future, and share this video if you're among those who want to witness a rising Africa, not a divided one. And don't forget to subscribe, because truth should never depend on headlines alone.